just as the Psalms is the ancient hymnal or prayer book for ancient Israel, the book of Proverbs is the textbook. It's the catechism for instructing a person, particularly a young person, in virtue. This book takes an adolescent and brings them to adulthood by warning them of the problems of life, for example, about fornication or sexual sins, the dangers of debt, and brings them to virtue, the life of virtue. We see a transition happening in ancient Israel. It begins with law, the law of Moses, commandments, precepts. But by the time we move into King David and into the Psalms and then King Solomon and the Proverbs, we're moving into the literature of wisdom. Law gives way to wisdom. And this is a trajectory all the way up to Jesus Christ, who is the Word incarnate. He is wisdom incarnate, as St. Paul says. Now, the organization of Proverbs is disorganized. That's all we can say. When I was in seminary, I had a professor challenge us to make an outline of the book of Proverbs, of course, because he knew it was impossible to do that. So we all tried to come up with some kind of structure for the book. And the student that impressed him the most took the book of Proverbs, cut it into little fortune-sized cookie pieces, put it in a big glass jar, and shook it up and gave it to him. And he was impressed by his creativity because it reveals that there is no unifying structure in the book of Proverbs, but there is a thematic outline, and it's divided up into 31 chapters. Why 31? 31 days. So you can go through this book month after month by reading a chapter a day, and you will become wise. So let's look at a rough sketch of the chapters of Proverbs, then we'll look at some of the themes. Chapters 1 through 9 are Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. Then we have another section, Proverbs 10 through 22, again labeled Proverbs of Solomon. Proverbs 22 through 24, the sayings of the wise. The wise are not indicated here. Then in Proverbs 24, we have another, these also are the saying of the wise. I don't know why that's needed, but it's added there. Proverbs 25 through 29, these are the other Proverbs of Solomon that the officials of King Hezekiah of Judah copied. Proverbs 30, the words of Agur. And then Proverbs 31, 1 through 9, the words of King Lemuel of Maasah, which his mother taught him. And then most famously, Proverbs 31, verses 10 through 31, which is the ideal wise woman, the woman of substance, the woman of valor. As you study Proverbs, and I suggest again, read a chapter every day for a month, do it for the whole year, you'll notice a number of themes. The primary theme is that wisdom is more valuable than anything on the planet. Gold, silver, rubies, it doesn't matter. Wisdom is what you need to seek. If you're a young person, think about this for a teenager. The most important thing in your life is to find wisdom. And the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. So there's a religious component to it. The other thing you'll see repeated over and over is not taking false vows or rash vows, not getting into debt. This is a really important lesson for our time, especially as young people are going to college and they're racking up these huge debts. $50,000, $100,000 when they're in their early 20s. It's ridiculous. It's contrary to the Proverbs. And then the other thing you see in the Proverbs over and over is warnings about the loose woman, warnings about the harlot, sexual immorality. So the way that young people, or really anyone, shipwrecks their life is not having wisdom, being foolish, rash vows, getting themselves into debt, getting themselves into sexual immorality. If you can steer clear of those rocks, you will be on the life of wisdom, virtue, and beatitude, which is something we believe to this very day. Now, the best way to understand the book of Proverbs in a thematic way is to see it as a dialogue, actually a debate between two women. That's right, two women. Throughout Proverbs, you see the harlot, the prostitute, the loose woman who is always trying to lead the person away into sin, into folly, into danger. And then you also see Lady Wisdom. Chokmah, which is the Hebrew word for wisdom, in Greek Sophia, is personified as a lady, as a person, and she is trying to lead you into virtue, lead you to God, lead you into safety. And so this is a catechetical tool. Look, young man, there's two women out there, both are competing for you. Follow Lady Wisdom, ignore the harlot. So let's look at some of these verses. So in Proverbs chapter 9, verse 1, we read, "Wisdom has built herself a house. She has hewn out 7 pillars." So here we see wisdom is a woman. She's personified. She's built a house, a structure, an edifice. It's held up by 7 pillars. Of course, 7 is the number of sanctity, the 7 days of Genesis, also the 7 sacraments. This is a sacramental, covenantal home. It is secure. That's where you want to live. You want to live in wisdom's house. Proverbs 9. Now let's look at the harlot. Proverbs 5:3 reads, "For the lips of a harlot are like honeycomb dropping, and her throat is smoother than oil." Proverbs 6:26, "The price of a harlot is scarce one loaf, but the woman catcheth the precious soul of a man." Proverbs 7:10, "And behold, a woman meeteth him in harlot's attire, prepared to deceive souls, talkative and wondering." Proverbs 23:27, "For a harlot is a deep ditch, and a strange woman is a narrow pit." So we see here, there's the beautiful, holy woman, Lady Sophia, and then there's this harlot who is leading people, taking their souls into the ditch, literally into the grave. Where else do we see this in the Bible? The book of Revelation. You remember the New St. Thomas Institute? If you haven't listened to the lessons on the book of Revelation, please do so. You will see throughout, in the very beginning of Revelation unto the very end, a dialogue and debate of 2 women. There is the bride of Christ. She's also called the New Jerusalem. She's without spot, without wrinkle. It's the church of Jesus Christ. It's those that follow the wisdom of God. And then you have the great whore of Babylon, the harlot, who is deceiving not only Israel, but all the nations. And so we are asked, as Christians, who are you going to follow? Are you going to be part of Mother Church, the pure ones who seek wisdom, who is Christ himself? Or are you going to follow sexuality, deceit, lies, folly? So this same thing that's going on in Proverbs, we find again in the New Testament. I want to close and focus with probably the most important part of Proverbs, and that's the last chapter. It's the grand finale, literally. It's placed at the end, and it describes the ideal woman. Now, there's different ways to read this. This could just be the ideal wife, mother, adult woman who is virtuous, who is holy, who is prudent. That's the literal reading. There's also the allegorical reading, and that is seeing this as the church, lady personified. You can also see it in a way as the Blessed Virgin Mary, who is the perfect mother for the Messiah, or it can be applied to the soul. In Hebrew, in Greek, in Latin, in all the mystical traditions, the soul is always female. The soul is feminine because it receives the grace and the gift of God, the transcendence of God. And so it can also be applied to the person, the believer's soul, as one seeking and receiving wisdom. So let's look at this final section from Proverbs 31. "Who shall find a valiant woman? Far and from the uttermost coasts is the price of her. The heart of her husband trusteth in her, and he shall have no need of spoils." So here the husband is, of course, God, or more specifically Christ, and he trusts in her. Verse 12, "She will render him good and not evil all the days of her life. She hath sought wool and flax, and hath wrought by the counsel of her hand." So she's busy, she's working, she's being productive. Verse 14, "She is like a merchant ship, she bringeth her bread from afar." Many of the church fathers and the medieval theologians see this as applying to the church because she brings her bread from afar. This is referring to the Eucharist, the transubstantiated bread that becomes the body and blood of Jesus Christ. And of course, that comes from afar. How much farther away can you get from heaven? And also perhaps an application of the Blessed Virgin Mary, because the bread of life enters into her womb from afar, from heaven. Verse 15, "She hath risen in the night and given a prey to her household and victuals to her maidens. She has considered a field and bought it. With the fruit of her hand she hath planted a vineyard. She hath girded her loins with strength, and hath strengthened her arm. She hath tasted and seen that her traffic is good. Her lamp shall not be put out in the night. We see Christ refer to this. He refers to the virgins who are to trim their wicks and keep oil in their lamps and be vigilant, looking for the return of Christ. In verse 19, she hath put out her hand to strong things, and her fingers have taken hold of the spindle. She hath opened her hand to the needy and stretched out her hands to the poor. Again, we see the church caring for the poor and the needy. Verse 21, she shall not fear for her house in the cold of snow, for her domestics are clothed with double garments. This, of course, is referring to us as being clothed in the righteousness of Jesus Christ. Verse 22, she has made herself a tapestry. Fine linen and purple is her covering. It is tradition that all priests, when they wear their albs underneath their vestment, they're always made of linen, not cotton, not anything else, not polyester. They're made out of linen. And what is the color of the apostles, or the successors of the apostles, the bishops in our time? They wear purple. It's referring back to the priestly color of Aaron and Moses and the Old Testament priests. Her husband is honorable in the gates, where he sitteth among the senators of the land. She made fine linen and sold it, and delivered a girdle to the Canaanite. Strength and beauty are her clothing, and she shall laugh in the latter day. Theologians see this as referring, of course, to the eschaton. The church will rejoice in seeing Christ return for her. Verse 26, she has opened her mouth to wisdom, and the law of clemency is on her tongue. She hath looked well to the paths of her house, and hath not eaten her bread idle. Her children rose up and called her blessed, her husband, and he praised her. Many daughters have gathered riches, thou hast surpassed them all. Favor is deceitful, and beauty is vain. The woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her works praise her in the gates. This is very powerful. It shows a woman who is working hard, staying up late, seeking virtue, seeking wisdom, caring for the needy, and bringing honor to her husband and to her children. So it applies to us individually in our souls. It applies to the church. It can, in a way, apply historically to the Blessed Virgin Mary, who I'm sure lived this way for Christ. And also it applies to the church. This is collectively how we are to seek wisdom to serve the bridegroom, who is Jesus Christ. So Proverbs, get on it, read it every day, 31 chapters, go through the sequence, and then start over. Thanks for being a member of the New St. Thomas Institute. We'll see you in the wisdom lessons to come. God bless.